Some people are forgotten so completely that even their own pack stops seeing them. The words echoed in Emily Carter's mind as she stood alone beneath the silver glow of the moon, clutching a basket of empty dishes against her chest. Laughter drifted across the clearing from the moon ceremony, bright and warm for everyone except her. Lanterns hung from towering pine trees, casting golden light over dozens of wolves gathered to celebrate destiny, family, and future mates. Emily watched from the shadows beyond the crowd. No one had asked where she was. No one had noticed she was missing. At 22 years old, she had become part of the background of Silver Creek Pack, as invisible as the wind moving through the branches overhead. Her pale blonde hair slipped loose from its braid as she carried another stack of plates toward the kitchen tents. Nearby, young wolves danced beneath strings of lights while elders shared stories around stone fire pits. Every smile she saw felt like it belonged to another world. Emily had spent years trying to earn a place among them. She volunteered for every task, arrived before sunrise, stayed long after everyone else had gone home. Yet somehow she remained the forgotten Omega. "Emily, you missed a spot." The sharp voice came from behind her. She turned immediately. Mrs. Hawthorne, one of the pack organizers, pointed toward a table with a disapproving frown. "The ceremony matters to people who actually contribute." Emily lowered her eyes. "I'll clean it right away." The woman walked away before hearing the rest. Emily swallowed the familiar ache in her throat and forced a smile that nobody saw. A few feet away, a group of younger wolves passed by. One bumped her shoulder without apology. Another laughed when several napkins slipped from her basket. Nobody stopped to help. Nobody looked back. The celebration continued without interruption. Above them, the full moon hung enormous against the dark sky. Emily remembered being a little girl and believing the moon goddess had a plan for everyone. Back then, she thought kindness would matter. She thought people would see her heart. Years later, standing alone among hundreds of familiar faces, she wasn't so sure anymore. A cold autumn breeze swept through the clearing. She wrapped her thin sweater tighter around herself and stepped away from the music. The farther she walked, the quieter the sounds became. Soon only distant laughter remained. She reached the edge of the forest where towering pines stretched toward the stars. The air smelled of earth, cedar, and approaching winter. For the first time all evening, she could breathe. Emily sat on a fallen log and stared into the darkness between the trees. Tears threatened, but never fell. Crying required someone to care. She tilted her face toward the moon instead. "Maybe they're right," she whispered softly. "Maybe I don't belong anywhere." The forest answered with silence. Then, somewhere deep beyond the tree line, a faint sound carried through the night. It wasn't the call of an owl or the rustle of leaves. It was something else. Weak, distant, almost like someone struggling to hold on. Emily straightened immediately. Her heart skipped once. The sound came again, barely audible beneath the wind. Most wolves would have ignored it and returned to the warmth of the celebration. Emily rose to her feet without hesitation. Forgotten or not, invisible or not, someone out there needed help. And before the moon crossed the western horizon, that single choice would change the course of her life forever. The sound came again, carried through the trees by the cold night wind. Emily stood motionless for a second, listening. It was faint, almost swallowed by the rustling branches overhead, but she knew she had not imagined it. Something was out there. Her heart beat a little faster as she stepped away from the path and deeper into the forest. The sounds of the moon ceremony faded behind her until only distant music remained. Moonlight filtered through the towering pines, painting silver patterns across the ground. Fallen leaves crunched beneath her boots as she followed the direction of the noise. The farther she walked, the colder the air became. A thin layer of frost shimmered across patches of grass. Emily pulled her sweater tighter around herself and continued forward. Most members of the pack avoided these woods at night. Stories about wandering rogues and forgotten spirits had circulated for generations. Tonight, however, none of that mattered. Someone needed help. The sound came again, closer this time. Emily quickened her pace. After several minutes, she reached a narrow clearing surrounded by thick trees. At first she saw nothing. Then her eyes landed on a dark shape near the base of a rocky slope. Her breath caught. A man lay motionless against the stone. For a moment she thought he might already be gone. Then she noticed the faint rise and fall of his chest. Relief washed through her. He was alive. Barely. Emily hurried forward and dropped to her knees beside him. He looked to be around 30 years old, broad-shouldered even in his weakened state. Dark hair fell across his forehead, damp from melting frost. His coat was torn in several places and covered in dirt from what appeared to have been a long journey through rough terrain. His skin felt cold when she carefully touched his hand. Too cold. Emily glanced around the clearing. No horse. No supplies. No sign that anyone had been traveling with him. Whoever he was completely alone. "Can you hear me?" she asked softly. There was no response. She tried again. "You are safe. I am here." His eyelids moved slightly. A faint sound escaped him, too weak to form words. Emily leaned closer. Even exhausted and barely conscious, something about him felt different. Powerful. Not dangerous. Just unusual. The sensation lingered like distant thunder before a storm. She pushed the thought aside. Right now he was simply a man who needed help. Emily removed her scarf and carefully wrapped it around his hands to provide warmth. Then she looked toward the sky. The moon had already climbed higher. Temperatures would continue dropping throughout the night. Leaving him here was not an option. "You picked the wrong forest to collapse in," she whispered with a small smile. "Luckily for you, I am stubborn." Gathering every ounce of strength she had, Emily helped him into a sitting position. He was much heavier than she expected. The effort left her breathing hard. Slowly, step by step, she guided him forward. Several times his knees nearly gave out. Several times she almost lost her balance. Still, she refused to stop. Nearly an hour later, the warm glow of her tiny cabin finally appeared through the trees. Relief flooded her chest. She opened the door and helped him inside. The small room smelled of cedarwood and chamomile tea. It was not much, but it was safe. Emily settled him near the fireplace and quickly added logs to the fading flames. Warm light flickered across his face. For the first time, she saw him clearly. Strong features, a calm expression even in unconsciousness, and around his neck, partially hidden beneath his shirt, a strange silver pendant engraved with the image of a wolf. Emily frowned. She had never seen that symbol before. As she reached for a blanket, the stranger suddenly spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Run." Emily froze. His eyes remained closed. "What?" she asked quietly. His brow tightened as though trapped inside a distant nightmare. "Run," he whispered again. Then silence returned. Outside, the wind howled through the forest. Inside, Emily stared at the mysterious stranger and felt an uneasy feeling settle deep in her chest. Something told her that bringing him home had just changed everything. Morning arrived beneath a sky of pale gray clouds. Emily had barely slept. Every few hours she checked the stranger beside the fireplace, replacing cool cloths, adding wood to the fire, and making certain he remained warm. By sunrise, exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but relief slowly replaced fear. His breathing had become steadier. Color had begun returning to his face. Outside, Silver Creek Pack started another ordinary day. Inside the small cabin, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Emily prepared a simple broth using the last vegetables she had stored for winter. She glanced toward the couch where the stranger rested. The silver pendant still hung around his neck, catching the morning light whenever the flames flickered. She found herself wondering who he was and how he had ended up alone in the forest. The questions lingered without answers. Near noon, she heard movement. Emily turned immediately. The stranger opened his eyes. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. His gaze moved slowly across the cabin, studying every detail before settling on her. Those eyes were striking, clear and steady despite obvious exhaustion. They carried the quiet awareness of someone accustomed to watching everything. "You are awake," Emily said softly. The man frowned slightly, as if gathering distant memories. "Where am I?" His voice sounded rough from dehydration. "My cabin," Emily answered. "I found you in the forest last night." He looked toward the window. Confusion flashed across his face before disappearing behind careful composure. "How long?" "Less than 12 hours." A shadow of relief crossed his expression. Emily handed him a cup of water. He accepted it with surprising politeness. "Thank you." The simple words caught her off guard. Most members of her pack rarely thanked her for anything. "You should rest," she said. "You were in bad shape." He lowered his gaze to the cup. "You should have left me there." Emily blinked. "Why would I do that?" For the first time, Something almost resembling a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It vanished quickly. Most people would have. Emily looked away. Most people leave me behind too. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable silence. Just honest silence. The kind shared by two people who understood loneliness better than they wished they did. Throughout the next several days, the stranger slowly recovered. He told her his name was Damien. Beyond that, he revealed very little. Whenever Emily asked where he came from, he offered vague answers. Whenever she asked where he was going, he changed the subject. Under different circumstances, she might have been suspicious. Instead, she sensed caution rather than dishonesty. Whatever had happened before she found him clearly weighed heavily on his mind. As the days passed, a quiet routine formed between them. Emily gathered herbs and supplies. Damien helped repair loose boards around the cabin once he regained enough strength. Sometimes they shared dinner while snow drifted gently beyond the windows. Other times they sat in comfortable silence listening to the crackle of the fireplace. For the first time in years, Emily no longer felt invisible. One evening, as golden firelight filled the room, Damien watched her carefully. "Why do they treat you that way?" he asked. Emily froze. "Treat me what way? Like someone who does not matter." The question struck deeper than she expected. She stared into the flames. "Because after a while," she whispered, "people start believing you are exactly what they call you." Damien said nothing for several seconds. Then his voice came quietly but firmly. "They are wrong." Emily looked up. Something in his eyes made her heart skip unexpectedly. Not because of who he was. Not because of what he looked like. But because it was the first time in a very long time that someone had looked at her as though she truly mattered. Winter settled over Silver Creek like a blanket of white silence. Days passed, then weeks. Snow gathered along the roof of Emily's cabin, and frost traced delicate patterns across the windows each morning. What surprised her most was not that Damien remained there while he recovered. It was how natural his presence had become. The loneliness that had once filled every corner of the cabin seemed to retreat a little more each day. One afternoon, Emily returned from gathering supplies in town with a basket of bread tucked beneath her arm. The moment she stepped onto the porch, she stopped. The broken railing she had meant to repair for nearly a year was gone. In its place stood smooth new boards, sturdy and perfectly aligned. She stared for a moment before pushing open the door. Damien looked up from the table where he was sharpening a carving tool. "You noticed?" Emily laughed softly. "You rebuilt the entire thing. It needed fixing. Most people would have ignored it." Damien set the tool down. Most people ignore things they do not value. The words lingered in the room long after he spoke them. Later that evening, they sat near the fireplace while snow drifted outside. Emily worked on mending an old blanket while Damien carved a small piece of cedar wood. The cabin glowed with warm amber light. For the first time in years, Emily felt something she had almost forgotten existed. "Peace. Tell me something," Damien said. "What would you do if you could leave this place?" Emily looked up. "Leave Silver Creek." He nodded. She considered the question carefully. Nobody had ever asked what she wanted before. "I think I would travel," she said finally. "See mountains, oceans, places where nobody knows my name." A faint smile touched Damien's face. "You would like the coast. You have been there? Once." And his eyes drifted toward the fire. "The water stretches forever. It reminds you how small your problems really are." Emily smiled. "That sounds nice." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then a strange sensation moved through the room. Emily felt it first. A warmth she could not explain. It spread through her chest and settled somewhere beneath her heartbeat. She glanced up instinctively. Damien was already looking at her. Something had changed in his expression. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. The feeling lasted only seconds before fading. Damien looked away first. Emily lowered her gaze back to the blanket, pretending she had imagined it. Yet her pulse refused to slow. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, silence returned. But it felt different now. Deeper. More fragile. As if both of them were standing on the edge of something neither fully understood. Later that night, Emily awoke to unfamiliar sounds. Voices. She sat upright immediately. The cabin was dark except for glowing embers in the fireplace. The voices came from outside. Low. Urgent. Emily slipped from bed and moved quietly toward the window. Through the snowfall, she saw several figures standing at the edge of the forest. Tall men dressed in dark coats. their faces hidden beneath hoods. One carried a lantern. Another appeared to be searching the tree line. Emily's stomach tightened. Something about them felt wrong. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned. Damien stood in the shadows, fully awake. The calm expression she had grown used to was gone. His eyes were fixed on the figures outside. For the first time since she had met him, genuine concern crossed his face. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet but unmistakably serious. "Emily," he said, "you need to stay away from those men." Emily remained frozen beside the window as snow drifted past the glass. The figures outside moved between the trees with deliberate purpose, their lantern casting pale gold light across the forest floor. Questions raced through her mind, but the look on Damien's face stopped her from asking them. During the weeks he had lived in her cabin, she had seen him tired, thoughtful, amused, and occasionally sad. She had never seen him look like this. Alert, focused, almost as though he had been expecting this moment all along. "Who are they?" she whispered. Damien kept his gaze fixed on the forest. "People looking for me." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "Why?" A shadow crossed his expression. "It is complicated." The answer frustrated her more than she wanted to admit. For weeks they had shared meals, stories, and quiet evenings by the fire. Yet she suddenly realized how little she truly knew about him. Before she could speak again, one of the figures outside stepped closer to the cabin. Damien moved away from the window immediately. "They cannot see me here. Are they dangerous?" Emily asked. He hesitated. "Not to you." Somehow that answer worried her even more. Several minutes passed. The voices outside remained low and distant. Eventually the lantern light disappeared deeper into the woods. Silence returned. Emily released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "They are gone." Damien nodded slowly. Relief did not appear on his face. If anything, he seemed more troubled than before. The rest of the night passed without sleep. By sunrise, the snowfall had stopped. Pale winter sunlight spilled across the cabin floor. Emily found Damien standing alone on the porch staring toward the distant mountains. The sight of him standing there made her chest ache for reasons she could not explain. She stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You have been awake all night." He accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "I have been thinking." Emily leaned against the railing beside him. "About leaving?" It was not a question. Damien looked down into the steaming coffee. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he sighed softly. "Yes." The word landed like a stone in her chest. She forced herself to smile. "You are finally healthy enough." "Emily," he stopped. Whatever he intended to say seemed to disappear before reaching his lips. A cold breeze swept across the porch. Somewhere in the distance a hawk called above the trees. "I knew this day would come," Emily said quietly. "You were never planning to stay forever." Damien turned toward her. His silver eyes held a sadness she had never seen before. "You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." "No," his answer came immediately. "Not anyone." Emily looked away. Deep down, she knew he was right. Most people would have walked past a stranger in the snow. Most people had walked past her countless times. Damien reached into his coat and removed a small carved wolf made from cedar wood. The same carving tool he had used beside the fire weeks earlier had created it. Every detail was perfect. He placed it gently into her hand. "Keep this." Emily stared at the carving. "Why?" "So you remember that someone saw you." Her throat tightened. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally Damien stepped back. "I have to go." Emily wanted to ask him to stay. She wanted to ask who he really was, where he was going, and why it felt as though part of her world was leaving with him. Instead, she simply nodded. Damien offered one final look, a look filled with words neither of them could say. "Thank you," he said softly. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest. Emily stood on the porch long after he was gone. Snow sparkled beneath the morning sun. The trees swayed gently in the wind. Hours passed, then days, then weeks. Winter slowly gave way to spring. No letters arrived. No messages came. Every morning, she glanced toward the forest without meaning to. Every evening, she found herself listening for footsteps that never returned. And little by little, the hope she had tried so hard not to feel began to fade. Spring arrived in Silver Creek with wildflowers pushing through the thawing earth, but nothing inside Emily felt renewed. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. She worked long hours, kept to herself, and tried not to think about the stranger who had vanished into the forest. Months ago, most days she succeeded. Some days she caught herself reaching for the small cedar wolf resting on her shelf and wondered whether any of it had been real. Then everything changed. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Emily had been helping organize supplies in the community storehouse when raised voices erupted outside. Curious townspeople gathered in the square. By the time she stepped into the crowd, dozens of wolves had already formed a circle around pack leader Victor Hale. His expression was grim. Beside him stood 2 council members holding an iron lockbox. The missing treasury funds were discovered this morning, Victor announced. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Emily frowned. The treasury fund supported elderly pack members and families struggling through difficult seasons. Everyone knew how important it was. Evidence has revealed who took them, Victor continued. Emily noticed several heads turning toward her. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. Then one council member pointed directly at her. Emily Carter. The world seemed to stop. What? She whispered. The missing coins were found beneath your floorboards. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Emily stared at them in disbelief. That is impossible. Is it? Someone called. Another voice followed. She lives alone. Nobody would notice. She always acted innocent. The accusations came faster than she could process them. Emily shook her head desperately. I did not take anything. I have never even seen the treasury box. But her words vanished beneath the growing noise. People who had ignored her for years suddenly had opinions about her. Wolves she barely knew spoke as though they had always suspected something. The loneliness she had carried her entire life now stood before her in its cruelest form. Nobody believed her. Victor raised a hand for silence. The council will meet tomorrow morning. Emily felt her pulse racing. You cannot be serious. The evidence is serious. The evidence was planted. A few wolves laughed at that. One woman rolled her eyes. Of course she says that. Emily looked around the crowd searching for a single friendly face. She found none. Later that evening she sat alone inside her cabin. The cedar wolf rested in her palm. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Her mind replayed the accusations again and again. Someone had framed her. She knew it. But knowing the truth and proving it were very different things. The next morning the council chamber overflowed with spectators. Emily stood alone before the assembled leaders while whispers filled the room. The decision came quickly, too quickly. Until further notice, Victor announced. Emily Carter is stripped of her duties and ordered to leave Silver Creek territory within 7 days. A stunned silence followed. Then scattered approval moved through the crowd. Emily felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. 7 days. After everything she had given this pack, they were sending her away without hesitation. As she turned toward the exit, her hand tightened around the cedar wolf hidden inside her coat pocket. For the first time in months, she found herself wishing Damien had kept his promise and returned. The 7 days passed faster than Emily thought possible. Every sunrise felt heavier than the one before it. By the final morning, the small cabin that had once felt like a refuge seemed strangely empty. Most of her belongings fit inside 2 worn travel bags. There had never been much to pack. As she stood in the doorway one last time, her eyes drifted toward the cedar wolf resting on the shelf. She picked it up carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. Outside, gray clouds stretched across the sky. The entire pack had gathered in the central square. Officially, the council called it a public departure. Unofficially, everyone knew it was meant to be a lesson. A warning. The wolf accused of betraying the pack would leave while everyone watched. Emily walked through the crowd alone. Conversations stopped as she passed. Some wolves looked away. Others stared openly. A few appeared satisfied. None stepped forward. None spoke in her defense. Pack leader Victor Hale stood at the center platform with several council members beside him. Emily Carter, Victor announced. Today you leave Silver Creek territory. Your exile begins. Immediately, the words struck harder than she expected. Not because she believed them, because she had spent her entire life hoping these people might eventually care. Deep down, some small part of her had never stopped believing she could earn a place among them. Now that hope finally broke, Emily lowered her eyes. I understand. Victor nodded. Then go. A cold wind swept through the square. Emily turned toward the northern road. One step, then another. The crowd remained silent. Suddenly a distant sound echoed across the valley. At first it was barely noticeable. Then it came again. A deep horn call carried on the wind. Heads lifted throughout the square. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. Emily stopped walking. The horn sounded a third time. This time, everyone heard it clearly. Victor frowned. What is that? Nobody answered. Wolves rushed toward the edge of town. Within moments, people began pointing toward the western ridge. Emily followed their gaze. Her breath caught. Riders appeared along the distant hilltop. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Dark banners snapped in the wind above a massive procession moving steadily towards Silver Creek. Sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating silver emblems stitched into the flags. A wolf crest. Elegant. Regal. Instantly recognizable. Panic rippled through the crowd. Royal Guards, someone whispered. The Crown. Why are they here? What is happening? Emily felt her pulse quicken. The procession entered the valley with remarkable discipline. Mounted guards surrounded an enormous black carriage trimmed with silver. Every movement reflected power and purpose. The entire square fell silent as the royal convoy approached. Even Victor Hale looked uncertain now. The lead riders halted at the center of town. Then the carriage door opened. A tall figure stepped onto the ground. The crowd collectively drew in a breath. He wore a dark coat embroidered with silver thread. Authority seemed to follow him like a living thing. Strong, confident, impossible to ignore. Emily stared without blinking. Her heart forgot how to beat. The face was familiar. The silver eyes were unmistakable. Months had passed, yet she would have recognized them anywhere. Damien. Around her, wolves immediately lowered their heads in respect. Some even dropped to one knee. Shock spread across Silver Creek like wildfire. Emily could not move, could not think, could barely breathe. Damien's gaze swept across the crowd until it found her. The moment their eyes met, the noise of the world seemed to disappear. And then, before the stunned pack could understand what they were witnessing, the man they had known only as a stranger began walking directly toward the forgotten Omega they had just cast aside. Emily could not move. The square around her had become a blur of stunned faces and whispered confusion, but all she saw was Damien. Every unanswered question from the past several months crashed together at once. The stranger she had sheltered, the man who had vanished without explanation, the person she had waited for long after hope should have disappeared. He stopped a few feet away and held her gaze. Emily. Her name sounded exactly the same as it had inside the cabin beside the fire. Warm, familiar, real, yet everything else was different. Royal guards stood behind him. Silver banners waved above the crowd. Power surrounded him like a living presence. You left, she whispered. Damien lowered his eyes briefly. I know. Before she could say anything more, pack leader Victor Hale stepped forward and bowed his head. Your Majesty, he said nervously. The words echoed across the square. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Emily stared at Damien in disbelief. Your Majesty. The realization struck with full force. The mysterious stranger she had rescued was not merely an important traveler. He was the Alpha King. Damien turned toward Victor. The warmth in his expression vanished. I arrived moments ago and was informed that Emily Carter is being exiled. Victor swallowed visibly. A regrettable matter, Your Majesty, but necessary. Evidence proved she stole from the pack treasury. Damien's silver eyes narrowed. Evidence. The single word carried enough weight to silence the entire square. One of the royal advisors stepped forward holding a leather folder. Your Majesty, he said. The investigation requested before our arrival has been completed. Confusion spread through the crowd. Victor's face paled. Damien accepted the folder and opened it calmly. Emily watched as his expression hardened with every page. Finally, he closed it. Interesting, he said quietly. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. Damien looked directly at Victor. The funds were not stolen by Emily Carter. Shock rippled through the crowd. Victor blinked rapidly. There must be some mistake. There is. Damien's voice remained calm. The mistake was believing nobody would discover the truth. Murmurs exploded around the square. Several council members exchanged alarmed looks. The royal advisor stepped forward again. Witness statements, financial records, and recovered documents confirmed that the missing funds were secretly diverted through multiple accounts under council supervision. Emily stared in disbelief. The crowd erupted into stunned whispers. Faces that had condemned her only days earlier now reflected uncertainty and embarrassment. Victor's confidence crumbled visibly. I can explain. Damien's gaze never left him. You had 7 days to seek the truth. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. Damien turned toward the crowd. Emily Carter was accused without proof, judged without fairness, and abandoned by the very people she served. Every word landed harder than the last. Wolves lowered their eyes. Some looked ashamed. Others simply looked afraid. Emily felt tears threaten for the first time since her exile had been announced. Not because she had been proven innocent, because someone had finally stood beside her. Someone had finally cared enough to fight for the truth. Damien looked back at her. The stern expression faded. When I had nothing, he said softly, she gave me shelter. When I was alone, she showed kindness. When she had every reason to walk away, she stayed. The entire square listened in silence. You called her forgettable, Damien continued. I call her extraordinary. And for the first time in her life, Emily watched an entire pack fall silent, not because they were ignoring her, but because they were finally seeing her. The square remained silent long. After Damien's words faded into the spring air, Emily stood motionless, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. For years she had dreamed about being noticed, about someone seeing her for who she truly was. Yet she had never imagined this moment. Never imagined that the man she had rescued from the snow would return as the most powerful alpha in the territories. Around them, the crowd seemed unable to look away. The forgotten Omega they had dismissed now stood at the center of the kingdom's attention. Damien stepped closer. The distance between them felt smaller than it ever had before. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Emily blinked in surprise. You do? He nodded. I left without telling you the truth. I thought I was protecting you. Instead, I hurt you. Emily looked down briefly. Months of confusion, disappointment, and unanswered questions lingered between them. Yet when she met his eyes again, she saw genuine regret there. I waited for a long time, she admitted softly. I know. Damien's voice carried a sadness that made her chest tighten. Not a day passed that I did not think about returning. The crowd listened in stunned silence. Royal guards stood respectfully at a distance. Even the wind seemed to quiet around them. Damien reached into his coat and carefully removed a small silver box. Gasps spread through the square as he opened it. Inside rested a beautiful pendant shaped like a moon surrounded by delicate silver leaves. This belonged to my mother, he said. One day it was meant for the woman who would stand beside me. Emily stared at the pendant in disbelief. Damien, he shook his head gently. Before I was a king, before titles and responsibilities, I was a man lost in a winter storm. You did not know my name. You did not know my position. You expected nothing from me. Yet you opened your door anyway. His silver eyes never left hers. That kindness changed my life. Tears filled Emily's eyes. For once, she did not try to hide them. Damien offered the pendant to her. Emily Carter, you once told me that people eventually become what others call them. I want you to know that they were wrong. You were never forgotten. You were never insignificant. You were always extraordinary. The square fell completely still. And if you are willing, he continued, I would be honored to have you by my side, not because of destiny, not because of tradition, but because you are the person I trust most in this world. Emily's heart pounded. She looked around at the faces that had once ignored her. Then she looked back at Damien. The future she had imagined for herself had always been small because she had believed she deserved little. Standing there now, she finally understood how wrong she had been. A smile slowly appeared through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Damien smiled in return. The warmth of it felt like sunlight after a long winter. As the crowd erupted into astonished applause and cheers, Emily accepted the pendant. For the first time in her life, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel unwanted. She did not feel forgotten. Beneath a sky washed gold by the afternoon sun, the Omega who had once stood alone in the shadows stepped forward into the light, and this time the entire world saw her.